What am I saying again?
This is MPW,
MPW.
the podcast
with your host, Xylo Aria.
Cool.
A podcast about music production
For the everyday musician.
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MPW podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and today we are here with the incredible mastering engineer, Jonathan Wyner. So Jonathan, as I mentioned, is an expert in mastering and has credits including loads of amazing artists, including David Bowie, Pink Floyd, Aerosmith, James Taylor, and loads more. And he's also the chief engineer at MWorks Mastering and the education director for Isotope. So great to have you with us today, Jonathan.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, although I wish we were actually together in the same place, but this will have to do for now.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Although, I mean, I'm sitting in Melbourne and you're sitting in Boston. So this does allow us to kind of do this quite easily. So
How cool
some
is
good
that?
things,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, lovely to chat to you. And I'm kind of curious to talk to you about a few things. And one of them was kind of artificial intelligence in mastering, which to me just sounds like such a futuristic topic, but also digging a little bit into your career and you know, some of the highlights and things as well. So we will get started. And I mean, just to start things off, I'd love to hear a bit more about your career, you know, where you got started, how you ended up in mastering and kind of, you know, working with so many incredible artists and kind of doing what you're doing now. So if you're able to kind of summarize that, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, sometimes I feel like my entire career has been kind of one. Oh, it's not an accident. It's just kind of an unexpected occurrence after another, you know, where I
Yeah.
wander into an opportunity that presents itself. I guess if I reverse engineer my journey, you know, I see myself as being an endlessly curious person and kind of like a moth to a flame in the sense that I'm always drawn to exciting and like amazing artistic experiences and working with artists. And so whatever I can do to be in that context, I do it. I started as a musician, and you know, I realized once I was like 11 years old or something that I was not going to be John Lennon because John Lennon was already John Lennon. And so when I got through like school and through my teenage years, I also realized I wasn't going to be God's gift to any instrument. And but I found my way to being fascinated by technology. I mean, when I got started out in the 1970s and the 1980s, you know, the way that technology was facilitating artistic creativity and helping us develop musical vocabularies and extend them, like, you know, once harmonizers came out and we could start contorting signals, or MIDI was invented, we could do like these crazy things where I would drive keyboards with my trumpet through a pitch to MIDI converter. This was all like brand new, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we can do this and create something that's never been seen or heard before. So the mashup of artistic expression and technology sort of took hold at a very early age for me. And I was drawn to music production before it was really kind of even a thing that one could do as a career. There were no schools teaching it. I just kind of made it up as I went along, and then found my way into a position where I actually started, I learned enough about it so I could start teaching and start to kind of refine what I was doing. And then I started recording and producing records. And then one day I was offered a job in a mastering studio. And this was 1985. And this was right at the beginning of the digital age. I mean, as far as the consumer was concerned, we'd had some digital audio systems that were capable of making not great sounding audio, but still, we could actually record to a computer, and even more to digital tape, maybe in the 10 years preceding that. But the CD was just becoming a thing. And so I was like, well, this looks interesting and new and unusual. So let's learn what this is about. So I got involved in the studio that was totally dedicated to this new format, unlike most other facilities which had come from the age of vinyl and cassettes and 8-track and all those other dinosaur-based formats. I mean, it's like petroleum products, right? Fueling a lot of the older formats. And what was cool is that there were some artists that were also kind of interested in innovating and attaching their sort of next phase of their careers to new technology and new delivery to consumers. One of whom was named David Bowie. And there were others like Frank Zappa, who was a huge audio file, but also really into digital audio because it gave him exquisite control in sort of the editing and the creative side. And there were sort of a host of others. And so they became clients of the facility, and I ended up doing a bunch of work with them. And so that's kind of how I ended up in mastering and learning about this new technology, which, we were really kind of on the bleeding edge. Nowadays, nobody thinks of, I mean, we log into Zoom and audio happens, right? But back then, like making anything digital audio happen was like, well, this might work this time, unlike the last 9 times I just tried it, the systems were fragile and things failed, and you had to be really patient and tolerant and had to sort of learn how to wrangle the technology, which was fun and interesting.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that, I mean, I love mastering. For a lot of reasons, I love the way you have to listen, and I love the way you have to pay attention to arrangement and the sort of emotional arc of a piece of music and try and sort of elevate it or realize it to the extent that is possible. But I love the music. It's not mastering that I love so much. So whatever I can do, I'm just as happy mixing something. I love being out on location, recording, producing, and I love playing, but I just do that for myself these days. But that's really what, sort of, that was the way I got into mastering. Now I think of myself as much as an educator and, somebody who wants to try to facilitate like what's next in music production. Like, I've seen several waves of audio technology change, and I think we're on the cusp of another change right now, and that's really exciting and really interesting, and I want to be involved with that and learn about it. And so I never think of myself as being just a mastering engineer, or just a this or just a that. It's the marriage of the technology and the art and the expression that's contained within, and the invention and all of that is what gets me going.
I love that. I love that. And there were a couple of things that you mentioned there, and I think I read somewhere as well. You were saying that, you started teaching almost as you were learning, sort of thing, which I think is so powerful, because I feel like speaking to a lot of people, they feel like they need to be at a certain level or to have all these kind of credits or whatever before they can start teaching something, because maybe they feel a sort of imposter syndrome that who am I to kind of, teach someone this. But what do you have to say about that? Because I had a lot of that, when I first started MPW as well. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, there are a bunch of things to say about that. One is, a great way to learn something is to have to teach it. Requires you to kind of dig in and discover what you don't know. And so if you're a curious person, and if you're willing to admit that you don't know things, then that makes you a great teacher. Because then you're sort of, if a student asks you a question about something with which you're not familiar, then you can say, well, let's figure this out. That's a great question. It's not that you have to know everything or have to have all the answers. Obviously, there's sort of a baseline sort of knowledge and some experience that you need to have to teach certain topics. But when I started out, I was teaching, basic signal flow, some microphone theory, microphone techniques, tape machine alignment, because, that was in the before times. And, and so I was quite competent, and I had a musical vocabulary. And so that was sort of where I got started. And I remember the first lecture that I was given in front of the whole school, I was asked to give a lecture on noise reduction, which was back then it was like Dolby and DBX and so on. And I was sweating bullets, and I like shedded that, for weeks to make sure that I understood it really, really well. So, but it really is a great way to invest in your own curiosity. And the imposter syndrome that you mentioned, that totally resonates. I don't think it ever goes away because no one knows everything, and there's always more to learn, and there's always an upgrade to your knowledge. One of the things I love about working at Isotope is I get to work with a bunch of the developers and the researchers, many of whom understand audio signal processing way better than like the greatest mix engineers on the planet. And it's been a great chance for me to say, well, I think I understand this, but I better go talk to these people and, let's go back to school here. I think we're just doing that for our whole careers. But, just my advice, not that you're asking for advice, but for anybody, is like, be real about what you do or don't know. And then that sets you up so that you can go figure out what you want to learn.
That's cool. That's cool. And yeah, I think there's so much power in hearing you say that, the imposter syndrome never really goes away, because it's something that I feel like I hear about so often. So to know that, it's something that everyone deals with, there's a lot of power in that. So yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And the other thing that you mentioned about kind of being part of all these different tech waves and changes that have come through, do you not get to a point where you're like, oh my God, I'm done. I don't want the next thing to come around anymore? Because I feel like that, that it would change your kind of process and workflow so much every time.
Well, you're right in the sense that if you invest a lot of energy in learning a piece of technology, so it becomes, you have a relationship with it. Like I remember, I was actually thinking about this earlier, doing punch-ins on tape machines. And every tape machine would have a different lag in the relays when you hit record. And so after a while you get good at it. And it was like being an athlete. You would sort of know how to finesse down to the millisecond so you could punch in between syllables. Then at some point when tape goes away, it's like you have to, all that time invested, it just sort of goes away. And then you have to sort of learn the new thing. There is a little bit of I'm not sure how many new platforms I want to become that facile with going forward. But I guess the sort of answer to that is, if there's something you really want to do and want to learn how to do, you deal with it. There's always going to be new things coming along. And, there's a lot of inertia built into the world of music production. I think people sort of fall in love with faders and knobs. And so, we had physical faders and knobs back in the day, and now we have faders and knobs on the screen. And, that's like the paradigm that everybody wants to keep using because it's familiar. There are probably much better ways of doing the work that we could figure out. But it's hard to sort of drive the change sometimes that I think ultimately might actually benefit us and facilitate some of the work going forward. Yeah, but it's a great observation, and I think, for most people who are truly creative, they don't get grumpy because the technology changes. They get grumpy maybe because where they were dealing with a green thing before, now they have to learn to deal with a blue thing, and it's like, oh, now there's another color, or it's got a different shape, or I have to find the menu in a new place, and but it's inevitable. I've been through so many different recording platforms in my career.
I'm sure. And yeah, that's a really interesting point that you mentioned, that we're kind of married to this old kind of maybe technology. I don't know if you could call it that, but the faders and knobs and that kind of thing. And you kind of replicate that into the digital world, where maybe it makes sense or maybe it doesn't. And maybe there's some people who've never actually worked with the physical form, that to them it probably doesn't really make a difference if it's a knob or if it's some sort of dial or something. But then we kind of, maybe it's just because we need a starting point and we kind of start with what we know. But yeah, I guess there are maybe unexplored ways to do things.
There
which,
are, and it's
which could be
exciting. I mean, there are people who are doing this, and some people who are distilling sort of gestural controllers. And I mean, I think that people who are just getting started, if they come in contact, even if you look at a DAW like Ableton, or if you take a look at even more recent developments like object-oriented mixing, and you're a young person coming up, and that's the first thing you come in contact with, then you're like, well, yeah, this is the way we do things. I'm not leaving anything behind. I'm like, this is what the lingua franca is. So they're probably the people who are best suited to drive adoption.
I guess so.
I'm actually about to go to London to do a little research on just this very topic.
Okay. Interesting. Well, we will see what comes out of that in the future.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. So going back to our topic, I guess, which was artificial intelligence in mastering, but I guess maybe in the world of production in general, can you define what that is? Because when I think about artificial intelligence, I think of literally a robot sitting in front of a computer doing our thing. And I assume that's not really what we're talking about. Maybe aspects of it is, but can you give us a better definition than that?
I think you're exactly right in that it's not exactly what we're talking about, although there are so many different versions of this. I mean, in order to really sort of dive in, I think we have to pull apart this phrase artificial intelligence. Like, what are we actually talking about? I guess the intelligence part is kind of appealing, right? It's it's tools that help us do things smarter or better, or give us more insights, or give us more capabilities. That's cool. The artificial part, I guess that refers to the fact that a machine's involved. But here's the sort of top level statement for me, which is, if we accept the premise that making music or making art is something that brings us joy, then why would we ever turn over the entire task to a machine? Wouldn't we just want to offload some aspects of the gig to a machine that we don't really want to do anyway, right? Like, because those are the parts that don't necessarily give us joy. Getting rid of clicks and pops that are errors in a recording. It's like, if a machine could do that and I could trust the machine to do that, like, I'm happy to let the machine do it.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of the first statement for me. There are certain areas where like auto mixing or auto composing might make some sense. And in fact, we can't prevent these things from happening, right? We know that there already are artificial intelligence driven commercial music composing platforms. And if you wanted to make some production music for a 30-second advertisement about, paper towels or something, you might engage one of these, because that's not necessarily art. It's not the kind of thing. It might be something that a composer would have made money from, that they might not make money from in the future, and we have to come to terms with that. But in those contexts, it kind of, it's happening. I mean, we can't, if we wish it away, it's not going to make it go away. But in the context of making music, I don't see why we would let the machine do it. I mean, what's interesting about that? Where's the sort of the joy? And quite frankly, the machines are not capable of I think, understanding the sort of the context for creative decision making at this point, and that's the arena where humans are, our sort of human existence sets us up to be much better at doing that. So being inventive and innovative and coming up with new ideas, and I mean that's part of what we do, and being sensitive to nuance. Another way to come at this topic is to break down the tools into two categories. One is automated systems that just do stuff for us, and I was kind of talking about that before. And then the other is the assistive tools. And those are the things that actually can make our work, they can facilitate our work. I'm not going to say they necessarily make our work better, although in some cases they might. And assistive tools can take many, many forms. I mean, we're actually making products that provide metering based on an AI-driven or a machine learning-driven system. that can give us insights into what we're doing by referencing tens of thousands of previous recordings and giving us a basis for comparing our work. So we understand sort of where we stand compared to this sort of common practice for like overall tone or level or, all the things that we can measure with the systems. And then we've got things like source separation. I don't know how many of the listeners are familiar with that phrase, but it's basically a way of unmixing signals. So if you take a track that's already been mixed, a source separation tool will allow you to deconstruct it and pull out the vocals, the drums, the bass, and the other instruments from each other and rebalance them. Or even, you could take your mix and retune your vocal and put it back together again. Yeah, it's wild and it's cool. I mean, and there's so many other things that we can do with it once we have this capability. But so the new technology that's based on machine learning and neural nets and all of these new technologies give us many, many new and interesting and different capabilities. And if we look back at, MIDI when it was invented, I think people were really scared of MIDI. They thought MIDI was going to take our jobs. It was like the orchestra is going to go away because it's all going to be MIDI orchestras. And I think if you look at it, not only did it mean that there was just a lot more music being made, there might be some like theater orchestras that suffered the fate of being replaced by MIDI, or the sort of one person band phenomenon from MIDI. But we've got new genres as a result. Could you imagine music production without MIDI now? And would you want it to go away? The answer to that in 1984 or 85 or 83 was like, oh, I don't know if I like this now. Look. So I think these sort of machine learning and AI driven technologies are kind of the one version of what MIDI was back then. And it's going to unlock so much potential and activities that we can't even imagine what they are right now, or music that we can't even imagine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you said about this, why would we let it do the thing or the part of the process that we love was an interesting way to look at it. And I think maybe you can only look at it that way if you're viewing mastering or production or whatever it is that you're doing as something that you do because you love it. I think if you look at it as this is a job and maybe you've lost sight of why you're doing it, then it could be more of a thing where you feel like, oh, this is coming in and now this is going to take my job away, rather than actually maybe it's going to do the things that it's not that fun and
Yeah.
I can actually
that's a real
enjoy.
concern if we look at music as a commodity. I mean, if you could deconstruct, it's like, I want to make a pop song, and to make a pop song, here's your equation. And you could feed the equation to a system. I mean, there are pop songs that have been written by AIs at this point. Then, yeah, that's something we have to think about, and we have to come to terms with. I'm not saying it's not going to change things. So I don't want to pretend that it's all like roses and rainbows, and we can all just go and make music and be joyous all the time. But I do think that the sort of human agency in the sort of creation, and it's communication. I mean, I think is one of the communicating story or idea or feeling is sort of what for me is at the core of the making music. So
Yeah.
I will own my privilege in sort of the fact that I'm able to talk about it this way because I've been fortunate or I've just persisted long enough to be able to do this work.
Yeah. Fair enough. And kind of deconstructing that a little bit, where, you're saying that AI allows us to analyze a huge amount of data and then kind of pick that out and apply it to something else or a new piece of work. When would simply accepting what the AI has done, maybe in the automated version that you were mentioning, is the right thing to do? And when would it not be the right thing to do, especially if you're maybe starting out and you're second guessing yourself anyway, and you're like, oh, well, this thing always,
Yeah.
I'm just going to go with that.
Well, no. So here's me as the educator saying we should use every opportunity to learn from the interaction with the technology. So if the technology offers you some options, I think it's important still to sort of look at what's being offered. It's like, oh, I see. So here's a model that is saying that all of my mixes are dull and they need to be brighter. And I kind of get that, and here's one possible way of brightening up everything or how much brighter to make it. But as I listen to it, and this is the user, it's not exactly the choice I would make. I'm going to modify it, but I appreciate the perspective that it's given me, and it's given me this perspective that's informed by like good data, right? So that's what I imagine as the interaction. There's no sort of nothing wrong morally for somebody to sort of push like, robot, give me an option. Okay, robot, I accept. I mean, we can do that. You can do that, but that again, that just seems like you don't really get anything from that unless you're just trying to like get past, whatever stage you're at in a production, because you've got more important work to do. But I think there's another sort of aspect to this, which is, and it's a little bit complicated or tricky, but if data can represent best practices, I mean, well, I'm going to say something that I think most people would immediately kind of get, which is a lot of people are working in substandard acoustic environments. Like they're in they have some treatment in their rooms, but they haven't built their room out, or maybe they have no treatment and they're listening on little speakers. And they spend 8 hours mixing something, and they're sort of losing their minds and they're losing their perspective, and the room doesn't even support them hearing what is really there anyway. So if this data can say, here's where you might be a little sort of out of bounds because you can't hear the bass. I'm telling you here, maybe, let me show you how different it is, and then you can make the adjustment. I mean, that's kind of valuable. And it does actually even allow us to work in environments that are not ideal, right? I mean, we'd all like to be maybe in great studios, but not everybody can afford to spend $300,000 to build from the ground up or whatever it is, nor does it make sense to do that. So, there's a lot of different ways in which I think the technology is helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yes. I guess
Have I convinced you yet?
I guess as like a DIY musician, there's definitely things that it's just going to be easier just to get something to help you because, like you said, you don't have all of the tools necessary or all the kind of surroundings to support you.
Well, look, I mean, like everybody uses virtual instruments these days, which is like your starting point is already like, talk about shortcuts. You didn't have to go find a drummer, find a drum, put it in a room, get a microphone, figure out how to record it, EQ it, compress it, so that then you could start doing the rest of your work. Like if you have a sample, that's already done for you. Like it's not really that different.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And yeah, it's funny that you kind of put MIDI in a similar category because, I don't know a world of production without MIDI, and I just can't imagine how that could be a thing. So yeah, I guess if you look at it as a similar thing, then that is exciting. And I guess for people who do have that fear of this is going to take my job away, what would you say to them?
I don't want this to sound unkind. I mean, you sort of have to come to terms with it. I want to sort of revoice this question from two perspectives. If you have a production job that that requires a lot of mechanical repetition and so on, then you probably at some point are going to need to think about how to modify what you do to fit into the new technology and the new workflows. And I don't want to become an apologist for that. I just think it's true. But if you are really invested in the creative side, if you want to do music, just keep doing it. I mean, I really, I have seen in my career so many artists that don't really hit their stride until they're in their late 30s. You know, I mean, they've just, because they've kept at it, because they have no other choice, because it's what they want to do. And some people get chances early on, some people get chances later, but if you keep at it, I don't think AI is going to be the thing that's going to prevent you from having opportunities. I really don't.
Yeah, and well, one thing you mentioned there, which is very interesting. I mean, you said many artists that you know didn't hit their stride until their late 30s. This is something that I feel like is such a fear in so many people that I know, which is just like the ageism of the industry. And people feel that as soon as they're, even near 30, like let alone late 30s, they feel like it's too late to have an impact on the industry. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you want to be an 18-year-old sensation, then you only have 1 year to do that, right? And if it doesn't happen by the time you're 19, then your career is over. But, I think everybody kind of evolves over time. And I think those that were the sort of the performers at 18 become the writer collaborators at 24, become the producers, there's editorial gigs, there's a lot of things that people kind of evolve into. So I there are very few people I know who just keep doing the same thing for 20 years. There's an evolution. The ageism is an interesting thing, and I think it's true, but I think, hence the evolution. It also depends on the genre, of course, that we're talking about. I mean, if you're a jazz artist, if you're aiming for sort of conforming to the image that, that's hard. That's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard for anybody. I never looked good enough to conform when I was 18, I just never was going to fit that bill. But, classical players and jazz musicians but even, I mean, we have role models. We have people like Imogen Heap, and we have people like, Bjork. I mean, they're amazing self-made artists, but they become kind of their own genre, their own sort of persona. And once you've defined that for yourself, and I think there was a guy named Bill Morrissey, who is a singer-songwriter, who had kind of I don't know if you know Tom Waits, but sort of that kind of ethos to it, sort of dark, gravelly, slow music. And it took him a long time before people sort of noticed him, but he was him. I mean, he was just so completely dedicated to being himself. And then when he found some success, it was, on his own terms. Anyway, I understand the fear. I mean, I think the way that our societies support creativity varies from one culture to the next. My understanding is that you're much more likely to have support from the culture in Europe, for instance, than in the US, which is a much, much more sort of brutal economic system when it comes to being a performing artist and valuing the arts. So it can be hard. It can definitely be hard. And I spent a long time, just sort of eking out a living. But, the other thing that sometimes I'll tell people is, I mean, you do this because it feels like it's your only choice. If you really feel like you have an option to make money as a veterinarian and you can do music on the side to be happy, like that sounds great. But there are people who are just like, this is really what I want to do. This is the only option for me, and I'm going to invest in that, at least for a period of time. You don't want to hurt yourself making the investment, and that was me. I mean, I didn't have a choice. I had to be around music.
No, it's good to hear that if it's something you really want to do, then age might not or shouldn't be the factor that decides whether you should keep at it or not. But yeah, I guess there are a few other kind of factors to consider there as well.
Yes, there are. Yeah. And again, I don't, always try to find encouragement based on my own experience and the experience of others that I've seen, but I don't want it to sound like it's easy or to
Yeah,
sound like that's
of
what I'm
course.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think from everyone we've spoken to, no one's had it easy at all. So I think that's definitely good to highlight that. So speaking of your career and kind of the good times and the tough times, what has been, if you had to pick one highlight of your career, is there one kind of standout thing, or is it too many to mention?
Well, there are many of them that each one has a different meaning. There are those that touched me deeply personally, and there are those that were exhilarating because of, the sort of the success. Like the sort of the Grammy game was something that was just exhilarating, being kind of at that party, the deep learning and the sort of being touched. I mean, so anyway, if I had to pick one that's probably the most relatable, it was doing all the work on the David Bowie catalog. And for me, the reason that that was such a highlight is that the story for me starts when I was 11 years old. And the first record I ever bought with my own money was Space Oddity by David Bowie. And I remember, so the cover had a picture of Bowie, but there was a pullout on the inside that had Bowie dressed up as a transvestite, or sort of, or at least androgynous. And I remember as like an 11-year-old boy, I didn't want any of my friends to see this. I was totally into the album, but I was like, I was nervous that for people to discover that I was into the music because of what they would think of me. And 11-year-old boys' egos and just sort of coming out with a sexual identity is very fragile at that time. So anyway, but I discovered Bowie early, and I became a huge fan of his through my teenage years. And so imagine like fast forwarding to the day when we go to the document storage site and pull out 45 boxes full of David Bowie 2-tracks and multi-tracks. And it's like, you have to listen through all of these. You have to go back and remix all of the multi-tracks. You have to go discover what's there. You have to listen. And the have to, of course, is BS, because I was in heaven. I was like, oh my gosh, I get to spend years with David Bowie in this way and with this music. And I wasn't in the room with Bowie, but I felt like I was. And it was incredible. It was incredible. Partly because it pulled forward like the heart of the 11-year-old boy making this, discovery. But, I learned a great deal through all of that. And it was a great credit. It was good for my career. It also was nerve-wracking because I was worried I might, like, you don't want to make a mistake on a David Bowie record,
No.
So, but that just adds to like the adrenaline in the room, and that experience just adds to this sort of heightened experience. And really, I mean, he was such an incredible musical innovator. So I worked on everything from The Man Who Sold the World through Scary Monsters, which spanned like 14 or 15 albums. And I did a bunch of mixes and remixes, and mixed some tracks that had never been heard before. And so that was, it was awesome.
That's cool. Yeah, to kind of go back to, maybe what brought you the love for music is just incredible. An opportunity to do that. So that's cool. And kind of the opposite of that, what has been the most challenging time in your career?
Well, I suppose, so I had been working in the studio that I mentioned earlier, Northeastern Digital Recording, and just outside of Boston. I've been working there for 5 years, and it was clear that it was time to move on. And I had decided, that it was maybe time to leave mastering. And I just, out of the sky, came this opportunity to go mix an orchestra as part of the World's Fair in Sevilla, Spain. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go live in Spain. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to make a big career change. I had just had a little baby, but she didn't need to go to school or anything. And so it's like, I'm going. And I sold my like home, and just about 6 weeks before we were scheduled to get on the plane, there was some terrorist actions, and they shut down the contingent there. They shut down the World's Fair, and I didn't have a gig. And I felt as if I'd sort of mentally burnt some bridges, and also I had this fantasy and dream about what I was going to go do, and that was no longer there. And so I had this moment where I was like, okay, what do I do now? And so what I ended up doing was emptying my bank account. I was like, well, I know I can make a go of it mastering because I've got relationships and clients. So I emptied my bank account and got the bare minimum of equipment that I knew that I needed to satisfy the work that I was going to do, and kept my fingers crossed. And there was a fair bit of hubris there. It's like, I don't know if this is going to work, but it ended up working out. But that was a very confusing moment for me. And I'll be honest, I did in a way feel like there was an opportunity lost, because I was really looking forward to the new adventure and possibly returning more to production. I mean, I really love production. I love mastering, like I said earlier, is wonderful. And I love doing it. I love the sort of intimate time that I get to spend with the music when I do. And there are other things that are great about it, but it's not the same as building music from the ground up. It's just a whole different value proposition. So, that was a moment for me. And, but it could have been way worse.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder, like, looking back on that time now, do you think, I mean, I know there's a part of you from what you're saying that's maybe wishes that you were able to try that other path that you didn't get to. But do you think maybe it was a bit of a defining moment in maybe you wouldn't be where you are today if you didn't make that decision?
I appreciate that. I think it's a very generous observation on your part. And I think it's, I can reverse engineer things and say everything happens for a reason in a way. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm proud of the fact that I was able to see my way through that. And rather than, there are some sort of, I don't know, regrets, or it's hard to own regrets, right? Or to say I have regrets. Do I sometimes wonder sort of what if? Sure. But sort of coming back to what you're referring to, I'm just really just kind of blown away by what I am allowed to do, the opportunities that I am given. I've been working on some records recently, one recently by a woman named Christian Karam. And I the first time I listened to it, I was in tears. I mean, and to be in that place doing this thing, and for that to be your work, so.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And do you think you would, give production a try at some stage, or go back to that?
I still do from time to time, but I just didn't ever invest in it as the one thing. That was my trajectory before I got into mastering. I'd worked on some records and was starting to get some placements with some major indies in the States, and then made this left turn. Yeah.
Yeah, no, very, very interesting. And yeah, and I do feel like these kind of challenges can kind of sometimes be the defining moments for some people. So that's very interesting. And kind of speaking to, I guess you've been around so many people who've really excelled in the music industry, and you being one of them, I would say. Is there a particular quality that you feel like these people have to get where they are? And, going back to the fact that we said that it's not an easy thing to do. So if there was one quality, what would that be?
I mean, the word entrepreneurial comes to mind, but I don't just mean that in the sense of a business, but in the sense of being sort of somebody who is going to figure out how to do something. You know, they have an idea of where they want to go, and they're going to learn and do what it takes to do that thing. You know, I think we hear these stories about somebody who's discovered and assume that that's, you know, they just sort of stood on a street corner or on a stage somewhere and somebody said, you are the greatest thing ever and we're going to take care of you for the rest of your life. Like that is not how that works. If anybody says that to anybody, you should run the other way because it almost never comes out well. So I think it's that sense of entrepreneurial, you know, like figuring it out and being flexible and willing to learn lots of different things and, you know, being intensely curious. I think also you have to really love collaborating with people. I think you have to learn to love people and sort of admire people for what they're good at doing and what they bring. I don't think there's much room for being a dictator in this world. And you know, I mean, there are some famous examples maybe of people, but we don't want to be those people, right?
No, maybe not. Yeah, no, that's interesting to hear. And I guess, you know, maybe another way to put what you mentioned on being entrepreneurial is being solution minded, or like knowing that, you know, whatever the problem is, you'll find a way out of it.
And there's a creative aspect to the problem solving. It's, you know, I think that sort of the invention that is required sometimes to come to the solution, even if it's not what you set out to do, you find yourself in a different place, but it's a place that gets you further down the road.
Yeah. No, that's great. And the other thing that you mentioned, which I thought was funny, was the kind of being discovered thing, because I feel like a lot of people seem to be waiting for that, you know, to be discovered and for them to be tapped on the shoulder and be like, you are the next gift to the world or whatever, and to know that that's probably not the approach that you want to take, and it's not really what's actually worked for people, even if it seems that way. I think that's really important to know.
Yeah, I think I definitely stand by that. I don't think it usually works in long-term romantic relationships either. You know, it's like you find somebody, it's like, oh my God, you're the one. And then like 5 years later, you start working on the relationship to make like, let's sort of figure this out and how we're going to go down the road together, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So Jonathan's advice for a career in music and for relationships.
And love,
so that's
right.
Good.
My father's a psychotherapist, and I think, you know, there's a little crossover, the listening aspect.
That's great. All right. So kind of coming to the end, what advice would you have for someone just starting out in the industry?
I mean, it's hard. I guess I would say, you know, first of all, paint a picture in your mind of what it is that you want to manifest. Like, you know, have an idea. If you see yourself in a studio mixing records, or if you see yourself on a stage performing, you know, to like boutique theaters, you know, or if you know, a stage in front of 30,000 people, whatever it is, have that. Chances are that will have to change over time, but have an idea in your mind of where you're headed, and then, you know, head in that direction, work towards that, figure out what you need to learn. I am a big fan of embracing what's new. I think that it's much harder. Like if you want to make a living, like being, you know, Nancy Sinatra or something, right? I mean, it's like that was already done, right? It's hard. It's hard to sort of recreate something that's already been and sort of stay in that place. So I think new genres and new technologies, new opportunities. It's very interesting what's happening right now with immersive audio and Atmos. I'm not predicting that that's going to be the sort of wave of the future, but it's an interesting place to get involved and learn and make connections, and that might lead to other interesting opportunities if you're sort of thinking about the music production side of things. I think staying up with new tech is a good thing.
Okay, cool. That's a good thing to note. And yeah, I think in so many forms than one. Yeah, I mean, even completely separate thing, but with MPW and kind of embracing the new TikTok wave, I feel like we've sort of missed the boat. But people that kind of started with it as soon as it came out are really benefiting from what that's doing to their platform. And I think for me, I've realized that when something feels like it could have some potential, just to try it anyway and just see how it goes. But
You can't do everything. You have to pick your spots. There's I don't know if Clubhouse is available where
yeah,
you are. So when that came out, I experimented with it a little bit. I was kind of curious to learn about it and see what it was. And I think some people have done well with it. And I chose that, you can only do so many things in so many places. So it does make sense to learn a little bit about it. And then
yeah.
it's like, is this where I want to spend the lion's share of my effort and time?
Okay, well that's good. Kind of learn a bit about it, but you don't have to be the master of all,
Because
all of the new
there's
things
going to
all
be
the time.
another thing.
Yeah. This is how I feel about new technology, Jonathan.
Yeah, exactly. And you're
No,
so right.
no. No, that's great. And just before we finish up, we have 2 questions from our audience. So I will just go through those. So we have one from Carmel. So Carmel asked, can someone get good at mastering without having a fully treated room?
Probably yes. Yeah. I mean, look, my I think my favorite metaphor for this is sort of food and an athlete, right? If you want to be a high performing athlete, what you put in your body matters, right? And you will only be able to perform to the level of what you give your body to sort of respond to. The same is true with mastering. I mean, ultimately, it is what you're listening to that informs your decisions and your ability to you can make good decisions, but if what you hear is contorted, if it's sugar coated, I'll go back to the food analogy. It's a stretch here, but you sort of get my point. You need to have excellent sound in order to know what you're hearing and then know what decisions to make and to get to where you think you want to get to. Does that mean that you need a very expensive facility? Can you do it in headphones? You probably need to invest in some serious headphones and still a decent rig, but there are more and more people doing that. So I think if I could sort of pull the question apart, do you need to spend $300,000 or $500,000 to build a room? No. Do you need to spend $10,000 on an outboard analog compressor? No. But do you need excellent input to your ears and your brain and a lot of practice and cycles to so that you get develop your muscles and your instincts so you know how to get where you want to go? I think that's the most important ingredient.
Okay, good. That's good to hear that you don't need 300 grand to get good at mastering.
Right.
And then the last question is from Diana. What are your top book recommendations for mastering? And I know you've written one.
I have written one. Yes. I'll recommend my book. And
yeah.
So I'm proud of the fact that my book, I think, is fairly approachable and it gives a really good sort of survey of the discipline. And I kind of refer back to how it has developed as a way of expressing the values, and the basic sort of tools and tool set. Bob Katz has written a book called The Art and Science of Mastering that takes a much deeper dive. He really gets into the weeds, and it's an excellent book. I think he's working on his 4th edition now. There are some others. There's a desktop mastering book that was written by a guy in Seattle whose name I can't remember. But those are the two, two to start with.
Yeah. Okay, great. We will keep that in mind. So thank you so much, Jonathan. That's been lovely. And I know I've gotten so much out of it, and I'm sure our audience will too. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great. I look forward to seeing you again someday.
Yes, one day in person, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
But thank you. And thank you for
so-
doing what you're doing. Thank you for giving voice to resources and serving the curiosity of, people who want to learn and interact and have a community.
No worries, no worries. I mean, for me, this doesn't feel like a job either. When I'm talking to people like you, it's loads of fun. So that's great. All right, thank you, Jonathan. I will leave you to the rest of your evening, and have a good one.
Yeah,
Bye.
you too. Take care, everybody.